The coffee was still warm when Emily Carter locked the door to her small yellow house on Silver Springs Boulevard. It was a humid August morning in 1991, the kind of Florida heat that settled early and stayed heavy all day. She placed her bag on the passenger seat of her blue Toyota Corolla and pulled out of the driveway at 7:36 a.m. The plan was routine, a short drive to the Ocala Public Library, where she worked as a catalog assistant. Neighbors later said they saw her car stop briefly at the intersection near the gas station, waiting for the light to change. She was alone. Traffic cameras were rare then, and no photograph would ever capture her final moments behind the wheel. By 8:15, she should have been at her desk sorting new returns. She never arrived. At 9:02 a.m., the library's head librarian, Margaret Hollis, called Emily's home phone after noticing her absence. The call rang unanswered. By noon, her co-worker placed another call, this time to the Ocala Police Department. Officers were dispatched to perform a welfare check. When Patrol Officer Ben Hayes arrived at Emily's house, the mailbox still held yesterday's newspaper. Nothing appeared disturbed. The only unusual detail was the car missing from the driveway. It was assumed she might have experienced a flat tire or minor breakdown on her way to work. That assumption changed 3 hours later. At 3:41 p.m., a call came from a highway worker clearing debris along State Road 40, about 5 miles east of town. A small sedan sat half-hidden beside a cluster of palmettos near a narrow trail that led toward a swampy stretch of forest. The worker noticed the driver's door slightly open, keys still dangling from the ignition. Detective Ronald Pierce arrived within the hour. The car was parked unevenly, as if it had rolled to a stop. The front seat held Emily's library ID and a half-folded grocery receipt dated the day before. The gas tank was half full, the engine cold. There were no visible signs of forced entry. But when officers expanded the perimeter, subtle details began to form a darker picture. A single black flat shoe lay 6 feet from the shoulder of the road. A few yards beyond that, grass was flattened, forming a narrow path toward the tree line. At the end of that path, near a drainage ditch, investigators found a delicate gold chain broken in 2 pieces. The clasp still held a single strand of brown hair. Crime scene technicians photographed everything. Tire impressions were taken from the shoulder, revealing 2 distinct tread patterns, one from Emily's vehicle, another from a wider truck tire. The second set of tracks led away toward the east, before fading into soft mud. No witnesses reported seeing any vehicles stopped in that area that morning. By sundown, the search had expanded. Officers used flashlights to comb through the brush, careful not to disturb footprints. They found scattered candy wrappers, a cigarette butt, and fragments of torn paper, possibly from a map. None provided immediate answers. The temperature dropped as the light dimmed, and mosquitoes thickened in the air. At 8:22 p.m., Detective Pierce ordered the area taped off until daylight. He marked the location on his notebook. Approx. 5.3 miles east of city limits, possible abduction site. The car was towed to the forensic garage under police escort. The next morning, as technicians processed the vehicle, they noted a faint smudge on the inside of the driver's door, possibly a handprint, partially blurred by moisture. The passenger seat bore no sign of struggle. The glove compartment was open, but contained nothing useful, only old receipts, a pair of reading glasses, and a tube of lip balm. Emily's purse, wallet, and keys were missing. Reporters gathered near the cordoned road by mid-morning. The local paper, Ocala Star-Banner, ran a small headline: "Librarian missing, car found east of town." The accompanying photo showed the blue sedan surrounded by police tape and swampland behind it. By the second day, volunteers from the community joined officers and K-9 units to search along the nearby trails. The terrain was difficult: thick vines, mud, and sharp reeds that tore through clothing. Around noon, one of the search dogs signaled interest near a waterlogged patch beyond the ditch. Officers moved in, pushing through brush. There they found a piece of fabric resembling the lining of a woman's skirt, tangled in reeds. The discovery turned the missing person report into a criminal investigation. The search perimeter widened to 2 miles. Helicopters scanned the canopy for disturbed ground or cleared spaces. Divers examined the deeper sections of the swamp but found nothing. By the evening of the 3rd day, silence returned to the site. The road was reopened, though the police kept a single patrol car nearby for monitoring. The last note entered in the day's report read, "Evidence suggests struggle and forced removal from scene. Victim unlocated. Case classified as probable abduction." The section closes with one final image, the same drainage canal where her necklace had been found. The surface of the water shimmered beneath the last light of day, disturbed only by insects and the faint ripple of a breeze. Somewhere beyond that line of trees, the trail of Emily Carter vanished. Before her name became part of a police file, Emily Carter was known in Ocala as the quiet librarian who never missed a day of work. She was 26 years old in 1991, a graduate of the University of Florida with a degree in English literature. She rented a small one-bedroom house east of downtown, where her routine rarely changed. She woke early, prepared the same breakfast of toast and coffee, and left for the library before the morning traffic thickened. Her co-workers described her as organized and precise. Books were always aligned perfectly on her desk, each return form carefully stamped. She had worked at the Ocala Public Library for 3 years, handling cataloging and helping senior visitors with research. Outside of work, she volunteered at a local reading program for children. Her life revolved around calm structure, the kind of ordinary rhythm that few people notice until it stops. Emily had moved to Ocala after her mother's passing, choosing a smaller town over the noise of Gainesville. Her younger brother, Daniel Carter, then a college student, visited her on weekends. The two shared a quiet bond, weekly phone calls, occasional dinners, and the kind of steady care that never drew attention. Daniel later told reporters that Emily planned to apply for graduate school in library science the following year. She had begun saving for tuition, keeping her plans private until she felt certain. Friends remembered her dry humor and patience. She was the person who stayed late to help students find sources for term papers, or who lent neighbors her spare umbrella during storms. There was no known conflict in her life. No disputes, no grudges, no romantic entanglements that might draw suspicion. She lived carefully, without excess or risk. Her neighbors on Silver Springs Boulevard described her as friendly but reserved. She waved from her porch, kept her garden trimmed, and occasionally attended Sunday service at a local Methodist church. Police later found no record of threats, disturbances, or late-night visitors. To everyone who knew her, Emily's life appeared safe and predictable. The disappearance shattered that image. In a town where personal safety felt like certainty, her sudden vanishing introduced fear. People began locking doors and checking windows twice. The community understood in an instant that a life so ordinary could still become the center of something terrible. Detective Pierce later noted in his report that the absence of motive complicated the investigation. Nothing in Emily's background suggested she was targeted. No evidence of theft, no financial trouble, no hidden relationships. She was, by every measure, an unlikely victim. Her friends from the library gathered for a candlelight vigil 1 week after the discovery of her car. They placed flowers and a single stack of borrowed books on the library steps, all checked out under her name. The gesture was quiet, like her presence had been. When the crowd dispersed that night, Daniel remained for several minutes longer, standing in silence. For the first time, he faced the possibility that his sister might never return. The investigation, meanwhile, was just beginning, and within hours, it would uncover the first traces of what happened on that road east of Ocala. The crime scene stretched along a narrow section of State Road 40, bordered by sawgrass and scattered cypress trees. It was an ordinary stretch of highway, often quiet except for passing trucks. But in August 1991, it became the center of a search that would last decades. Emily Carter's blue Toyota Corolla sat tilted slightly toward the ditch, its tires half buried in soft dirt. The vehicle was intact, the keys still in the ignition, headlights off. The driver's seat was pushed slightly back, an unusual position for someone of Emily's height. Her co-workers confirmed she always drove close to the steering wheel. Investigators noted that detail immediately. Detective Ronald Pierce led the early response. A thin man with a background in homicide, Pierce was methodical and cautious. He instructed officers to create a 30-yard perimeter before touching anything. Photographers documented every angle of the car, the roadside and the surrounding brush. The evidence markers soon multiplied across the ground: a shoe, a necklace, a partial footprint, and several cigarette butts. The first clear sign of disturbance was found 6 feet from the passenger door. The grass was bent, and loose soil showed the pattern of a struggle. Nearby, a single gold earring glinted in the sunlight. It matched the set Emily had worn to work the previous day. Technicians collected samples and swabbed the interior for fingerprints. The steering wheel bore faint traces of moisture, possibly sweat. The handprint on the inside of the door was blurred, as if wiped partially. At that time, fingerprint recovery depended on physical powder and manual comparison. No match emerged from local databases. Beyond the road, a faint trail of flattened reeds led toward a darker area of swamp. Officers followed it for nearly 30 yards until water made progress impossible. The smell of decay and stagnant algae hung thick in the air. They marked the end of the trail with orange tape and recorded coordinates for further exploration. Search teams returned at dawn. K9 units combed the undergrowth, while deputies moved systematically through the marsh. The dogs picked up a scent from Emily's shoe but lost it near standing water. The terrain complicated everything. Gators, snakes, and deep pockets of mud made even simple movements dangerous. Despite that, the search continued for 3 consecutive days. By the 4th day, helicopters circled overhead, scanning for disturbed earth or signs of a body. Nothing surfaced. The car remained the strongest lead. Investigators reconstructed the timeline. Emily left home at 7:36 a.m., failed to arrive at work by 8:15, and was reported missing by noon. Based on engine temperature and dew accumulation, they estimated her vehicle had been parked by the roadside around 7:50 a.m. That narrow window of time, less than 15 minutes, became the core of the investigation. Detective Pierce's notes described the scene as orderly in appearance but violent in detail. There was no shattered glass, no tire blowout, no mechanical failure. The car had not been forced off the road. It had been stopped deliberately. Whether Emily stopped willingly or under duress was unclear. Rumors spread quickly through the community. Some speculated she had been followed. Others suggested she might have stopped to help someone she knew. The location was remote but not deserted. Several small farms and workshops lay within a mile. Officers canvassed the area, interviewing residents and checking for vehicles matching the secondary tire tracks. One farmer recalled seeing a dark green pickup truck parked near the woods that morning. He assumed it belonged to hunters or road workers. When shown photographs later, he could not confirm details beyond color and general shape. Still, the report was entered into the file. As evidence piled up, the absence of a body weighed heavier. Pierce refused to label the case a homicide, but he admitted to colleagues that probability suggests abduction with fatal outcome. The media began covering the disappearance as a potential murder. On the 7th day, volunteers located another small item, a fragment of fabric caught on barbed wire along a service road half a mile from the main site. Forensics later confirmed it matched the lining from Emily's skirt. That discovery shifted the focus eastward into denser terrain where vehicles could not travel easily. Despite continuous searches, no further remains or belongings were found. After 10 days, the official field investigation concluded. Pending laboratory results, the car was returned to storage under evidence seal. Photographs, maps, and soil samples filled 3 large binders labeled Carter 91. When the sun set that final evening, officers removed the last strip of yellow tape from the trees. Traffic resumed. For most drivers passing that spot, it looked like any other patch of Florida wilderness. But for the investigators who stood there, the stillness carried weight. They knew something terrible had occurred, something carefully concealed by time and swamp water. The report filed that night closed with a single line. Victim remains unlocated. Scene suggests rapid struggle and removal by unknown individual, or individuals, it would be years. Before that statement changed, Detective Ronald Pierce knew that the first 72 hours determined everything. When Emily Carter's car was found on State Road 40, he and Detective Maria Gonzalez began the methodical process of building a timeline, minute by minute. They rechecked the map, pinpointing where Emily's route intersected with local roads and driveways. Every address within a 2-mile radius became a potential source of information. Door-to-door interviews began the following morning. Residents described normal activity: delivery trucks, early commuters, school buses, Nothing unusual. Only one report stood out. A farmer on the east side of the highway had noticed a dark green pickup parked briefly near the tree line around 8 a.m. He did not see the driver. He recalled no movement, only that the vehicle was gone when he returned from feeding livestock 20 minutes later. The description was vague, but it was the only tangible lead. Detectives released a bolo, be on the lookout, for a dark green pickup, possibly a Ford or Chevrolet, model late 1980s to early 1990s. Patrol units monitored nearby highways and rural backroads. Nothing surfaced. By day 5, the Ocala Police Department converted the missing person case into a major crime investigation. The media coverage intensified, and the department set up a public tip line. Calls flooded in, nearly 80 in the first week. Many were dead ends, sightings of similar cars, unverified rumors, and anonymous claims of responsibility. Each call required documentation, callback, and classification. Detective Gonzalez managed the intake. Her notes revealed frustration but also precision. She logged every statement, even the implausible ones. "We cannot afford to ignore anything," she wrote in her daily summary. Pierce focused on the car. He ordered a forensic sweep of the Toyota's undercarriage, tires, and interior fabrics. The lab identified small traces of mud containing fine clay particles, inconsistent with the roadside soil. That detail suggested the car had been briefly driven off the main road before being left at the final location. However, no additional tire tracks matched the movement. The discovery raised more questions than it answered. The forensic unit also recovered several fibers from the passenger seat, polyester strands, possibly from work clothing. They were catalogued and stored, though testing at the time offered little insight. DNA analysis was still in its early stages, capable only of basic blood type matching. None of the recovered samples produced results. Witness interviews extended to Emily's co-workers and friends. Everyone described her routine as predictable. No one reported unusual phone calls, recent arguments, or changes in mood. She had no boyfriend, no conflicts, and no debts. Her calendar listed a dentist appointment the following week and a library committee meeting the next day. Nothing appeared suspicious. Detectives considered whether Emily might have stopped to help someone she recognized. She was cautious but not distrustful. If the pickup truck driver had appeared stranded, she might have offered assistance. That theory remained plausible, though unproven. By the second week, the investigation slowed. The field searches were complete, and forensic analysis awaited laboratory confirmation. The tip line continued to ring, but genuine information was scarce. Reporters began asking whether authorities suspected foul play. Pierce's response was measured. "At this point, we are treating this as an abduction case. All possibilities remain open." Rumors spread quickly across Ocala. Some residents feared a serial offender. Others speculated about personal motives. The sheriff's office fielded calls from neighboring counties regarding missing women, hoping to link patterns. None matched Emily's circumstances. In early September, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, FDLE, offered assistance. Their analysts reviewed the scene photographs and confirmed the likelihood of a second vehicle involved. They also noted the position of the car's ignition key, slightly turned backward, not forward. It indicated that Emily's car may have been shut off manually after she exited or was forced out. That subtle clue became one of Pierce's main theories, that Emily was stopped by someone posing as a helpful motorist or authority figure. The offender could have convinced her to shut off the car before the attack. By late September, every local lead was exhausted. Detectives drafted a full case summary, 47 pages of field notes, photographs, and statements, and submitted it to FDLE for review. The case file grew heavier but offered no direction. Inside the station, frustration settled in. Detectives worked late hours, rereading statements, mapping timelines, and questioning every small inconsistency. Gonzalez noticed one minor discrepancy. A library co-worker had mentioned seeing a man loitering near the parking lot 2 weeks before the disappearance. He had asked about repair services and left after a short conversation. No one had thought to report it sooner. The lead came too late to verify. Without a name, vehicle plate, or photo, it joined the growing list of uncertainties. By October, investigators faced the painful truth that progress had stopped. The case remained open but directionless. Pierce entered a final note in his report that month. Evidence intact, suspect unknown. Investigation ongoing pending new information. Outside the station, flyers bearing Emily's photograph still hung on bulletin boards. The colors faded under the sun, paper curling at the edges. Each one carried the same line in bold black letters. Missing since August 1991. The leads were thinning, but the hope had not yet died. The disappearance of Emily Carter unsettled Ocala in ways the town had never experienced. In 1991, it was a quiet Central Florida community where most residents knew their neighbors and trusted the rhythm of small-town life. Crimes of violence were rare. The image of a young librarian vanishing on her morning drive spread fear through neighborhoods that once left doors unlocked and porch lights off at night. Within days of the discovery of Emily's car, volunteers organized search efforts. Local churches opened their halls for coordination meetings. Flyers showing her photograph, soft features, light brown hair, calm expression, were printed by the hundreds and taped to storefronts, post offices and gas stations. Supermarkets offered bulletin space near entrances, and local radio stations repeated her description every hour. The community's unity was immediate and practical, not dramatic. People simply wanted her found. The Carter family became the face of the search. Emily's brother, Daniel, only 23 at the time, spoke to reporters in short, deliberate sentences. His appeals were calm, controlled, and focused on facts. What Emily wore, what car she drove, where she was last seen. He rarely showed emotion on camera, though those who knew him described his voice as strained with exhaustion. Their parents had both passed years earlier, leaving Daniel to manage the crisis alone. Candlelight vigils were held in front of the library where Emily had worked. Co-workers placed books and flowers on the steps, symbolic gestures of memory and patience. Residents gathered in silence, holding candles that flickered against the humid air. The pastor from a local Methodist church read a short prayer for guidance. No speeches followed. People simply stood together, facing the direction of State Road 40. Detectives Pierce and Gonzalez attended one of the vigils briefly, remaining in the background. They watched as Daniel knelt near the candles, tracing his fingers across one of the missing person flyers, before standing and leaving without a word. Later, Pierce recorded in his notes, "Community deeply affected. Public cooperation high. Emotional stability maintained." As the weeks passed, that stability began to strain. Rumors spread through diners and convenience stores. Some whispered that Emily might have known her abductor. Others insisted the case was connected to highway drifters. Police dismissed speculation publicly, but could not stop it privately. Fear became part of daily conversation. Women avoiding evening errands, parents reminding children not to walk alone. Local newspapers published editorials about safety awareness. Churches organized self-defense workshops. For many, Emily's name represented the loss of security more than the mystery itself. Life in Ocala continued, but shadows lingered on the familiar streets. Daniel Carter continued visiting the police station weekly, asking about updates. Each time, detectives repeated the same truth: no new leads, no confirmed suspects. His frustration never turned to anger, only silence. In his final statement to the press that year, he said quietly, "We just need one piece of truth. One." When winter came, the vigils ended. The flyers remained, their edges frayed and faded. The community returned to its routines, but no one forgot the librarian whose car had been found by the swamp. And beneath that returning calm, the investigation was about to enter its most uncertain phase. The months following Emily Carter's disappearance brought a flood of information, none of it solid. Every rumor became a report, every whisper a possible lead. Detectives Pierce and Gonzalez worked through winter 1991, dividing long days between interviews, evidence reanalysis, and growing frustration. The first significant lead came in October. A man detained for petty theft in nearby Gainesville claimed he had information about Emily's case. During questioning, he described seeing a woman matching her description entering a pickup truck near the highway. His statement collapsed under scrutiny. He could not identify the road correctly, and his story shifted with every question. He later admitted fabricating it to receive leniency on unrelated charges. In November, investigators received an anonymous letter postmarked from Tampa. The note claimed Emily had been abducted by two men operating a traveling repair crew. The handwriting was erratic, the grammar disjointed. Forensic analysis found no fingerprints, no traceable DNA, and no verifiable connection. The letter joined dozens of others stored in the growing case archive. By December, police had processed over 100 separate tips. One local woman reported a suspicious man offering roadside assistance weeks before the disappearance. Detectives tracked the individual, a traveling salesman, who was later cleared. He had documentation showing he was out of state at the time. Pierce and Gonzalez began to see the same pattern repeated, promising leads dissolving into nothing. Tire casts from the scene produced no match. The cigarette butts revealed inconsistent brands, none yielding usable prints. The fabric fragment confirmed only that Emily's clothing had torn during a struggle, information already known. In early 1992, investigators attempted a large-scale canvass of nearby counties for any crimes with similar methods. None aligned. The absence of comparable cases deepened the sense of isolation. The case had no pattern, no link, and no suspect that fit cleanly. Then came a moment of false hope. In February, skeletal remains were found in a wooded area 50 miles north near Lake City. The news reached Ocala before confirmation. Reporters gathered outside the police department, waiting for identification. 2 days later, dental records proved the remains belonged to another missing woman from a different county. The Carter case remained unsolved. Pierce's notes during this period were brief and procedural. Revisited scene. Nothing new. Interview fatigue setting in. Evidence preserved, limited progress. His writing showed the weight of time pressing against routine. Detective Gonzalez continued to re-interview witnesses, hoping a small inconsistency might lead to something overlooked. Several residents near the scene recalled a local mechanic, Harold Jennings, who often drove a green pickup truck. At the time, the tip was logged but not prioritized. Jennings had no criminal record and no verified contact with Emily. The lead sat quietly in the file, one of many names without connection. By the end of 1992, departmental resources were stretched thin. New cases demanded attention, and the Carter investigation was gradually reassigned to the cold file category. Pierce submitted a final year-end memo summarizing the status. Evidence maintained. Investigation inactive, pending new forensic capacity. The phrase reflected the era's limitation. DNA technology was still primitive, reliant on large, uncontaminated samples. Many items from Emily's case contained only trace material, not yet usable. Detectives boxed the evidence carefully, labeling each bag with date, location, and initials. The contents were stored in a temperature-controlled room at the Ocala Police Department. The search ended without closure, replaced by quiet frustration and exhaustion. The media lost interest, the public moved on, and the Carter family faced silence where answers should have been. By spring 1993, the investigation stood still. The official summary listed the case status as unsolved. The next update to that file would not come for nearly 3 decades. After 1993, the name Emily Carter drifted from headlines into silence. The missing person flyers were taken down, and the phone line once dedicated to tips went quiet. The case file, 3 thick binders and several boxes of evidence, was sealed and placed on a metal shelf inside the Ocala Police Department's storage room. Detective Ronald Pierce transferred to another division a year later. Detective Maria Gonzalez continued for a time, checking periodically for new forensic possibilities. Each visit ended the same way, with her closing the file, making a brief note, and walking away. There was nothing more the department could do. Through the 1990s, technology moved faster than the case. DNA testing advanced, but the backlog in state labs was overwhelming. Cases with stronger samples received priority. Emily's evidence, minimal and degraded, remained untouched. In 1996, Daniel Carter relocated to Tampa. He took a job in insurance claims and tried to build a routine, but every August he called the Ocala Police Department to ask the same question. Anything new? The answer never changed. Detectives responded with polite professionalism, but Daniel could hear the distance in their voices, the sound of people who had already said everything they could. Time turned memory into routine. The house Emily had rented was sold twice. The old Toyota was auctioned by the state, its interior stripped and cleaned long before new forensic methods might have extracted additional clues. Each passing year erased small opportunities. The Ocala community slowly folded the story into local memory, one of those tragedies people mentioned when warning newcomers about highway safety. The library where Emily worked continued its operations. A small framed photo of her remained in the staff break room, fading under fluorescent light. New employees rarely recognized the face. Detective Gonzalez retired in 2004. In her final interview before leaving, she mentioned the Carter case by name, calling it the one that stayed unsolved the longest. She requested the files remain preserved despite limited storage space. Her note in the archive log read, "Do not destroy. Future tech may solve." Years became decades. Evidence boxes aged quietly under climate control. Labeled, dated, and sealed. The plastic bags inside held fragments that once defined the investigation. The broken necklace, a single shoe, and swabs taken from the car door. None appeared significant anymore, yet each carried microscopic traces that would one day become crucial. By 2010, the world had changed. Cold case divisions were forming across the United States as forensic tools improved. Genetic databases grew with the expansion of CODIS, the combined DNA index system, and later through private genealogy sites. But in small towns like Ocala, resources were limited. The Carter case remained classified as inactive. Daniel Carter married in 2012 and had a daughter. He spoke of his sister rarely, except on anniversaries. Each year he drove to the roadside where her car had been found, leaving a single white rose tied with a ribbon. He said little, stayed a few minutes, and left. The ritual became his quiet form of remembrance. Inside the police department, new detectives occasionally reviewed old cold cases during training exercises. The Carter file surfaced several times. Each review ended with the same conclusion: insufficient evidence for re-examination. The lab requests were too costly, the samples too degraded. The file returned to the shelf. The passage of time changed everything but the facts. The location remained, the evidence remained, and the unanswered question, who took Emily Carter, remained. In 2019, nearly 28 years after the disappearance, the department upgraded its evidence tracking system. Every physical item was recatalogued and barcoded. During that process, a young forensic technician named Dr. Ocala Nguyen, recently hired from the state laboratory, came across the Carter file. She noted the dated labels, the old handwriting, and the sealed envelopes marked Trace Necklace Clasp. Unlike earlier analysts, she recognized the potential. She made a simple note in her report: candidate for micro-DNA extraction. That entry, buried deep in an internal database, would reopen the case that had been silent for nearly 3 decades. For now, though in the quiet of 2019's evidence room, the boxes still sat untouched, the air still heavy with dust and stillness. The sound of the old metal shelf creaked faintly when she closed the cabinet. The Carter case was not forgotten, only waiting. And soon, after almost 30 years of silence, it would begin to speak again. In the summer of 2020, the Ocala Police Department began a statewide initiative to reopen unsolved homicides and disappearances using advanced DNA technology. The program was small, funded through federal grants, but it allowed select cases to be re-evaluated under new forensic procedures. Among the dozens chosen was the Emily Carter case, flagged by forensic analyst Dr. Ocala Nguyen for potential micro-DNA recovery. When Nguyen retrieved the evidence box from the storage shelf, the air inside the evidence room smelled faintly of cardboard and time. Each label carried the signatures of long-retired detectives. She logged the items into the new database: necklace clasp, torn fabric, and several biological swabs collected from the car door in 1991. The samples had degraded, but technology had changed. Nguyen worked with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, FDLE lab in Tallahassee, to process the samples using next-generation sequencing, a method capable of extracting genetic profiles from traces once considered unusable. It was a process of precision and patience, months of micro-level examination for results that might not come. By October, one of the samples, residue from the necklace clasp, yielded a partial male DNA profile. It was incomplete but viable. The profile was uploaded into CODIS, the National Criminal DNA Database, for automated comparison. Days passed. Then, on October 17, 2020, the system returned a hit. The DNA matched a man named Harold Jennings, a former auto mechanic who had lived in Marion County during the early 1990s. His name had appeared once in the original investigation files, but had never been pursued further. Jennings had left Ocala in 1994 and later relocated to northern Florida, where he lived quietly for years. He had a minor criminal record, mostly related to property damage and unlicensed repairs, but nothing violent. The hit was unexpected, almost anticlimactic at first. Nguyen double-checked the data, then forwarded it to the cold case unit. Detective Ryan Hensley, assigned to reopen archived investigations, received the alert. He read the old file cover to cover, reviewing the names, the locations, the untested evidence. The notes written by Detective Pierce almost 30 years earlier mentioned Jennings briefly. Green pickup truck. Works locally. No cause to detain. Now that single line became the focal point of a revived case. Before any action was taken, the FDLE required a confirmatory test. Nguyen prepared a secondary extraction from the same necklace clasp, ensuring no contamination. The second analysis matched the first. Probability of error, less than 1 in 1 billion. Jennings, now 71 years old, was living in Alachua County, working part-time at a salvage yard. He was unmarried, lived alone, and had no family nearby. Public records showed no recent arrests, no significant criminal activity. On paper, he appeared unremarkable. Detective Hensley organized a quiet background review. Surveillance confirmed Jennings' identity and residence. He was cooperative when approached, agreeing to provide a new DNA sample. He believed it related to an old employment record check. When the swab results returned weeks later, the confirmation was absolute. The sample matched the DNA from Emily Carter's necklace clasp with complete precision. The discovery stunned everyone involved. The link was small, a microscopic trace of skin cells transferred during contact, but it was enough to connect Jennings to Emily on the day she vanished. Hensley reviewed old property records, confirming that Jennings had owned a green Ford pickup truck in 1991. Witnesses from the original. Investigation had mentioned seeing a similar vehicle near the E highway where Emily's car was found. None of those connections were strong enough at the time, but now they formed a chain of evidence that reached across 3 decades. On December 4, 2020, the Ocala Police Department officially reopened the Emily Carter investigation. Press releases were withheld until confirmation could be verified, but inside the department, a quiet sense of purpose replaced the stillness that had lingered for years. Detective Hensley wrote in his internal memo, "After 29 years, forensic technology has spoken. The case is active." In one of her later interviews, Nguyen described the moment simply, "It was not dramatic. It was math precision and time finally meeting truth. The data was clear, the evidence precise. But questions remained. If Harold Jennings was responsible, how had he escaped suspicion for so long? And what exactly had happened to Emily Carter after that morning in 1991? Those answers were about to surface, one fact at a time. When Detective Ryan Hensley reopened the Carter case in late 2020, he inherited a file thicker than any in the department's archive. 3 decades of interviews, reports, and evidence logs filled binders marked with fading labels. The story inside them had once consumed an entire community, then vanished into bureaucratic stillness. Hensley was 43, deliberate in speech, and known for precision rather than instinct. His colleagues described him as quiet, methodical, the type who believed in process more than luck. The Carter case became his assignment, but within weeks it turned into his fixation. He began by reconstructing the original timeline hour by hour. He traced Emily Carter's last known movements from her driveway to the point where her Toyota was found. Using old photographs, he built a visual map pinned to his office wall. Red markers for confirmed sightings, blue for speculation, and yellow for evidence recovery sites. The map revealed a narrow corridor of possibility. Between 8 a.m. and 8:45 a.m. on August 17, 1991, Emily vanished within a 6-mile stretch of highway, bordered by pine forest and scattered businesses. At least 4 witnesses that morning reported a green pickup truck idling near the shoulder. The notes identified the driver only as a man in his 30s with dark hair, average build. The vehicle description matched Harold Jennings' 1989 Ford F-150. Hensley requested access to the FDLE's digital archive, pulling every record of Jennings' known employment, vehicle registration, and residential history. It painted a quiet but troubling pattern. In the early 1990s, Jennings worked as a mobile auto mechanic, offering roadside repairs, precisely the kind of scenario where he could encounter isolated drivers like Emily Carter. The deeper Hensley looked, the more fragments aligned. Service logs from 1991 listed several jobs along the same stretch of State Road 40. Handwritten note found in one log referenced a brown Toyota, engine trouble. OG 17, the handwriting, matched Jennings' signature from an old business license application. The entry's date and description mirrored Emily's disappearance exactly. That detail shifted the case from theoretical to undeniable. Jennings had interacted with Emily that morning. The question was whether it ended as assistance or abduction. Hensley submitted a new request for ground search authorization, focusing on a property once owned by Jennings's employer near Silver Springs. In the 1990s, it had been used as an auto repair lot surrounded by woods. By 2021, it was overgrown and abandoned. Cadaver dogs were deployed in a limited sweep. The soil yielded fragments of burned fabric and metallic debris, but no human remains. Still, the discovery was enough to justify escalation. The case shifted from review to active investigation. Hensley read the old interview transcripts of Jennings from 1991. At that time, Jennings had claimed he barely knew Emily and had just seen the news. The original detectives found no physical evidence to detain him, and the technology then available could not disprove his alibi. Now Hensley had the opposite, definitive DNA proof, but a lifetime separating evidence and action. He began to re-interview surviving witnesses. Many were older now, some had moved away. One, a retired truck driver, recalled seeing a green pickup pulled off the road near Emily's Toyota. He described the driver as agitated, standing by the passenger side, like he was arguing with someone. No one had taken that statement seriously in 1991 because it lacked precision. 3 decades later, it became critical context. The investigation consumed Hensley's nights. His colleagues noticed the lights in his office often remained on past midnight. He studied the crime scene photos, the evidence lists, and the aging case notes written by Pierce and Gonzalez. Their handwriting felt like echoes of the same frustration he now carried. He kept one line from the original report pinned above his desk: "Case inactive pending new forensic capacity." That capacity had finally arrived. By mid-2021, Hensley prepared his findings for the state attorney's office. The DNA match, corroborating service log, and eyewitness accounts together formed a coherent narrative, one that placed Harold Jennings directly in contact with Emily Carter at the time and place of her disappearance. Aldi. That remained was the final confirmation. Confession or corroborating physical evidence. July 2, 2021, an arrest warrant was approved. 30 years after Emily Carter vanished, the man who had once been overlooked was about to face the truth hidden beneath decades of silence. On the morning of July 8, 2021, investigators from the Ocala Police Department and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement arrived at a small 1-story home on the outskirts of Alachua County. The property belonged to Harold Jennings, now 71 years old. The sun had just begun to rise over the tree line when officers surrounded the structure. The arrest team moved quietly. There were no cameras, no sirens, no commotion. Jennings opened the door without resistance. His expression was calm, almost indifferent. He was informed of the warrant for his arrest in connection with the 1991 disappearance and presumed homicide of Emily Carter. The statement was read clearly, each word echoing through the still morning air. Jennings said nothing. He was handcuffed, placed in the back of an unmarked car, and transported to the Marion County Sheriff's Office for processing. Inside the department, detectives and forensic analysts gathered around a silent conference room. After 30 years, The case that had begun with a stalled car and a missing librarian had reached its turning point. Jennings' background was unremarkable. Born in 1950, raised in North Florida, he spent most of his life working mechanical jobs. His employment history showed transient patterns, short-term contracts, seasonal labor, and frequent relocations. His record revealed minor arrests for trespassing and theft, but no violence. Those small details had shielded him for years, allowing him to blend into the quiet anonymity of working-class Florida. When questioned, Jennings maintained composure. The interviews were conducted under full legal procedure, with each session recorded and transcribed. The first hours yielded nothing. He denied knowing Emily Carter, denied being near her car, denied ownership of the necklace fragment. Then, confronted with the DNA match, the silence broke. The recorded transcript of his third interview showed a marked shift. Jennings's voice slowed. The answers shortened. He asked to see the evidence photographs. He studied them for several minutes without expression. The weight of 3 decades of stored truth began to surface. According to the official summary, Jennings provided a partial admission. He claimed that on the morning of August 17, 1991, he had stopped to help a woman whose car had stalled on State Road 40. He said she became anxious and upset, and that an argument followed. What he described next was inconsistent and fragmented, statements that changed order and tone. But one fact remained constant. He admitted physical contact. Forensic analysts confirmed that this admission aligned with the DNA evidence found on Emily's necklace clasp. Jennings refused to elaborate further, but the admission alone provided the missing link the department had sought for nearly 3 decades. Investigators reconstructed his likely movements after the incident. Employment records placed him near Silver Springs that same day. Fuel receipts confirmed a trip westbound shortly afterward. That timeline matched the discovery site of Emily's vehicle, and the region later searched for remains. The state attorney's office reviewed the evidence meticulously. Although Emily's body had never been recovered, the combination of DNA, circumstantial evidence, and Jennings' partial confession was sufficient to file charges of second-degree murder and unlawful disposal of human remains. News of the arrest reached Ocala within hours. Local headlines described it simply: "Arrest made in 1991 Carter case. DNA solves cold file." There were no crowds outside the courthouse, no major public demonstrations. The community's reaction was quiet, almost reverent, as if the town collectively exhaled a breath it had held for 30 years. Daniel Carter, now 53, was notified privately by detectives before the press release. He declined interviews. His only statement, delivered through a family liaison, read, "We waited for the truth." It came. During the preliminary hearing, Jennings sat motionless. The prosecutors presented the chain of evidence, the necklace clasp, the forensic reports, and the timeline reconstructed from Jennings' own records. Each exhibit formed a precise sequence, an unbroken thread connecting the morning of August 17, 1991, to the arrest in 2021. The defense offered no alternative suspect, only claims of memory loss and confusion due to age. The DNA did not waver. Jennings entered a plea of guilty to a reduced charge of manslaughter in exchange for a full written statement detailing the events of that day. In his confession, later summarized by the court, he described a confrontation that escalated when Emily refused to accept his unsolicited assistance. He panicked when she tried to leave. The account that followed was mechanical and emotionless, a sequence of movements, mistakes, and silence. He ended the statement with the words, "I left her by the road. I should have gone back." After 30 years of unanswered questions, the truth was neither cinematic nor redemptive. It was quiet, procedural, and final. The case of Emily Carter was officially marked solved, but closure, as the detectives soon learned, was a word that belonged to paperwork, not to people. When the official announcement was made on August 12, 2021, the headline reached local papers before noon. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement confirmed the arrest of Harold Jennings in connection with the 1991 disappearance of Emily Carter. For most residents of Ocala, it was a headline they never expected to see. Television anchors summarized the case in 30-second segments: a missing librarian, a green pickup truck, A 30-year investigation brought to resolution by a trace of DNA on a broken necklace clasp. For the Carter family, the story was already over long before the cameras arrived. The courthouse was silent on the day Jennings entered his guilty plea. Only a handful of people sat in the gallery. Daniel Carter, 2 detectives and members of the press. Jennings appeared frail under the courtroom lighting. His voice barely carried as he confirmed his understanding of the plea. There were no emotional outbursts, no dramatic moments. The process was orderly, administrative, and final. He was sentenced to 30 years in state prison. At 71, it was effectively a life term. The court ordered him to provide a full written statement of the incident and to disclose the location where Emily's remains might be found. Jennings wrote pages of notes that ultimately yielded nothing useful. Searches based on his descriptions led to wooded areas near Silver Springs, but no remains were recovered. Detective Ryan Hensley filed his final report in late September 2021. It documented the chain of events from the DNA match to the confession. The report closed with a single sentence: "The case of Emily Carter has reached its judicial conclusion." For Dr. Ocala, the forensic analyst whose work reopened the file, the case became a benchmark, a demonstration of how persistence and technology could intersect to reveal truth from decay. She later presented the findings at a statewide conference on cold case forensics. Her presentation lasted 15 minutes. She did not mention emotion or tragedy, only data, chain of custody, and the mathematics of probability. In Ocala, public reaction remained subdued. Local residents revisited old fears and memories, but found little satisfaction in the outcome. 30 years had turned the story into a piece of history, something that belonged to another era. The library where Emily worked placed a small plaque near the entrance bearing her name and the years of her life. It read simply, "In memory of dedication and kindness." Daniel Carter never spoke publicly again. He continued his quiet visits to the roadside where Emily's car had been found. He no longer brought flowers. He stood for a few moments each year, then returned to his car and drove away. For him, resolution came without comfort. Within the department, the Carter case was used in new training modules for cold case detectives, a reminder of how lost evidence could still hold answers if preserved correctly. Detective Hensley received a commendation for his work, though he rarely mentioned the case afterward. His only remark to colleagues was brief. It was her story. "We just finished the paperwork." By early 2022, the media had moved on. The case file was archived for the final time and placed back into the evidence storage room where it had rested for decades. Its edges were newer now, the ink clearer, but the silence around it felt the same. Justice had been served in the technical sense. The truth had been recorded, signed and filed. But for those who had carried the weight of Emily Carter's absence, the arrest was not an ending, only a boundary between mystery and memory. And in that quiet space between the two, the story of Ocala's longest cold case finally settled into history. The story of Emily Carter is not one of dramatic revelation, but of persistence, time, and the quiet endurance of truth. Her name remained in a box of files for nearly 30 years, waiting for a fragment of science that did not exist when she disappeared. The evidence never changed. Only the world around it did. For the investigators who opened the case in 1991, the outcome came long after their careers ended. Detective Ronald Pierce passed away in 2008, unaware that the file he once labeled inactive pending forensic capacity would eventually find resolution. Detective Maria Gonzalez lived long enough to read the news in 2021. Her family recalled that she simply nodded when she saw the headline, folded the newspaper and said, "About time." Forensic analyst Ocala continued her work in state laboratories, applying the same micro-DNA methods to other dormant files. To her, the Carter case proved that no evidence is ever too old and the only technology too. Young detective Ryan Hensley moved on to another department in the 2023. When asked in a departmental interview about the Carter case, he described it as a matter of precision and endurance. He refused to call it closure. "Closure is what people want from stories," he said. "Investigations end. People remember." The town of Ocala absorbed the news with the quiet dignity of a place that had once known fear and now understood resolution without triumph. The roadside where Emily's car was found is still marked by a small wooden cross placed years earlier. The wood has darkened with age and the lettering has faded, but the marker remains upright. Local residents maintain it without schedule, as if by silent agreement. At the public library, the plaque bearing Emily's name reflects light from the morning sun that filters through the glass doors. New employees pass by it daily, few stopping to read the inscription in full. Yet the name stays, a quiet reminder of the librarian who left home one morning and never returned. The Carter case stands as a record of what time can conceal and what science can recover. It is a story built from fragments, a piece of fabric, a trace of skin, a sentence in a forgotten report, assembled decades later into clarity. For those who seek meaning in tragedy, the lesson is not comfort, but continuity. Truth persists even when memory fades, even when silence fills the spaces where voices once were. The final entry in the official case summary reads, "Subject identified. Case closed. Evidence retained for record." It is a sentence without emotion, written in the neutral language of procedure. Yet behind those words lies the full weight of human loss and the quiet endurance of those who refuse to forget. Emily Carter's story ends not with sound, but with stillness. A stillness earned by 30 years of searching, waiting, and believing that even the smallest trace can one day speak again.